So I'm just going to turn this over now to Richard Walker, who is the director of the Living New Deal project. We've got a few people that want to speak to you, and then at 6:30 we're going to go outside to the patio and we're going to have an award presentation. We're going to have Bob Reich. Thank you so much for coming.
Susan Lance, who really organized all of this. We do have a wonderful team with the Living New Deal. Some of them are here. We have people across the country. We have associates, 50 of them around the U.S. who send in materials. We have a wonderful board. But in this case, Susan did it. And she gets a I think you all know about the Living New Deal, or you wouldn't be here. But if you don't, you really need to check out our website. We are, on the one hand, a historical geographical project where we are gathering all the information on and documenting New Deal public works. A part of the New Deal, that is not actually well understood. People know, oh yeah, Social Security, labor law, so they pretty much have all heard of that. Jobs. So, oh, they made jobs. Well, they didn't just make jobs. They rebuilt the United States. And we've been using it and living off that stuff for the last 75 years. And a lot of it is still out there, amazingly enough, and we're documenting that. And you should look at our map if you never have. It's pretty fantastic. And on top of that, of course, what we're trying to do is build a project for public education about what good government can do, if it's allowed to, good people, a sense of ethics, of the public good. That's what the New Deal stood for. And ultimately, our project is a political project, not just an archival project. It's about educating the American public and urging people to realize that government could be more. And it's precisely what we need today after a long period of deterioration, of individualism and privatization. We need that collective spirit of the New Deal, the ethical spirit of the New Deal, and the can-do and non-corrupt, actual productive government that rebuilt this country and could rebuild it again. So please check out what we're doing. And of course, if anybody wants to support us financially, we always need that. We're one of those pathetic non-profits and also a university project. And we love your support and thank you, all of you. I just told you we're not a pathetic non-profit, we're a robust who yet has to be. I also forgot, very wanted to say this. We have even bigger ambitions. We want to project, we want to take this to another level and create a Living New Deal center that does everything we do on a full-scale institutional basis. That is research, public education, and public policy. And there's no reason why if we have a Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute and all these awful groups on the right, we shouldn't have a center, an institute that's doing that kind of thing on the left. And we're in the spirit of the New Deal. And by the way, there's no museum for the New Deal. And that would be part of the operation. So if you really want to support us, that's what we're going to do next. Thank you.
Yay!
My name is Chris Bryseth, and I'm a part of the Francis Perkins Center and the National New Deal Preservation Association. And I had the good fortune of inviting Francis Perkins to live with us at Telluride House at Cornell. And she came to a kind of rushing dinner, and after dinner we went up for her talk. And I took it upon myself to ask the first question. So I said, what was your most important accomplishment? And she said, Social Security. And then we went on from there. That night, I took her with her colleagues from the Industrial Labor Relations School up to the room that would be her room, the corner of Telluride House. and it had a private bath. It was just below the big bell tower at Cornell, like the Campanile here. And I said, you know, I don't want you to say yes tonight because you need to think about this. We're not going to get any neater because you're here. You're not here as a house mother, and your room is right over the music room, where there'll be a lot of Bach, Bartok, and Brubeck. That didn't seem to slow her down at all, and she said, how much would it cost? And if you've read Kirsten Downey's book, you can appreciate that her life was always haunted financially. She was never in a comfortable place. She was taking care of an invalid husband who'd gone through their family inheritance. So when I said, oh, you'd be on room and board scholarship, the twinkle in her eye, I can still remember. All the meals, because she was a lousy cook. Like Ellen. Maybe for the Eleanor Francis book everyone's talking about, the centerpiece should be they were lousy cooks. and their handwriting was lousy, which Kirsten has a theory about that too. Anyway, they went home, and Morris Neufeld, who was her boss, she said, Morris, do you know what those boys have done? And he and I have been working on this. He said, yes, Miss Perkins. She said, I feel like a bride on her wedding night. And so for the last 5 years of her life, she lived with 25 to 30 young men. And I should add that, as I did in my introduction to Kirsten today, that while she was there, Talley House became the first co-ed residence hall in the nation. And I don't think that was a coincidence. There had been women guests, short-term guests. Eleanor Roosevelt stayed there once when she came to lecture at Cornell. But she was the first permanent resident. So we had a very charmed life. And she developed relationships, as she did around the world, and with lots and lots of us. And I mean, they were close friendships. So when she went out to California at UCLA, which is I'm a graduate of, I hope that's all right to say, on this campus, I said, would you mind if my parents gave you a dinner party? No, that was terrific. So my father picked her up, but thinking, here's this, we thought she was from Boston. And in my article, which some of you may have read, the Francis Perkins Annual, I've changed not a word. So there are a lot of misapprehensions of that. My parents thought, well, we need to get the best sherry, the best cream, dry, and medium, and they bought 12 beautiful sherry crystal glasses. And there was about 7 people at the dinner party. And my dad brought her into our house, which actually had a bar that was modeled on the Hotel Roosevelt in Hollywood. And the glasses were all lined up with all the sherry. And he said, Madam Perkins, would you like some sherry? She said, well, if that's all you have, I usually have bourbon and branch water. So the party was a great success. And at the house, because at that time, unlike some other people we've talked about recently, the drinking age was 18. So we could legally not only have beer and wine, but we could have booze. So she actually had bourbon with some of us. One of the things that I urged her to do was to get Henry Wallace to come over for a seminar. And the letter that she wrote him really should have been in your book, because it was her art of persuasion in dealing with one of her cabinet colleagues, by the way, her closest colleague with whom she stayed very close. And she said at the very end, the boys will be very disappointed if you don't come. So Henry came, and he of course didn't want to even move in before he went up to the ag campus to see the agronomists. As most people here will know, Henry Wallace was the one who developed hybrid corn and went on to build a little company called the Pioneer Seed Company. So that when he died, shortly after this, by the way, the family was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, all of which is being put to good use in 3 foundations dealing with issues that he was very concerned about. So he came, and we took him up to the guest room, and we walked in, and he looked at the Bruegel print on the wall, And he said, what do you see in that print? And I said, peasants kneeling, working in the field. He said, no, what do you see down there? I said, strawberries. He said, yes, strawberries. Well, he was working at that point on the genetics of strawberries for the Caribbean. And so that's what he wanted to talk about. He said, let's talk about strawberries. And I said, well, we really want you to talk about the New Deal. There, of course, were wounds there that had to be dealt with in terms of the '44 election. And Miss Perkins said to us, by the way, she was Miss Perkins, not Madam Perkins. She said, don't talk to him about 1948. So we all stayed away from that topic, but we had a party that night. And at the party, a young woman, not so young, came up to him breathlessly and said, oh, Mr. Wallace, I worked for you in 1948. And he said, well, you're a courageous person to acknowledge that. And went on to talk very candidly about the left-wing coalition he attempted to put together to have a different foreign policy than the one Mr. Truman had established. Well, when my wife and I got married, and she was very fond of my late wife, this is the letter she wrote. Dear Jane and Chris, my best wishes to you as you begin your life together. May you be happy, of course, but may you be more useful to the world, more perceptive of human need, and more able to help it in double harness than the sum total of your two separate lives. God bless you both and help you in your quest for truth and kindness. With love, Francis Perkins. So, when I my first teaching job was at Williams, which was the next year, but she and I put on a seminar with Jim Farley. So we had the experience, and I was the moderator of these two seminars. So as a mid-20s graduate student, I had this opportunity to work with three of the major New Deal figures, that was not my field. I was a European historian, but as my life has come around to this part of it, I've because of Kirsten Downey finding my article that I'd never published, I got involved with Tom and Conagel, who you're going to hear from in 2 minutes, and have been very active in the effort to secure her legacy. One of the other letter I want to read to you was after the Kennedy assassination. I wrote to her a condolence letter in early December, and this is her response. You can't think how much I appreciated your note, or how much help it gave me to hear from another human creature, also in pain and horror and shame over the assassination. I still can hardly believe it. Telluride took it hard. They're so young and not inured to grief. Paul Wolfowitz, who was House President, did his part nobly. Several boys obviously grew up in those 3 days. The university called a memorial meeting for Saturday a.m. It was extremely good. Clinton Rossiter, Cornell Professor of American Institutions, was the only speaker, and he was brilliant. He satisfied the mind and the emotions also. They're printing it, and I'll send you a copy. It's been a hard fortnight. This boy into man, so young, with a life ahead of him, so intelligent, so dedicated. In some ways one feels as at the Roosevelt death, but there was no murder then to add horror and confusion. I never doubted that the country and its institutions and ways of living would survive, but was startled and even annoyed that some people seemed to think America was over. I think that is why all the European rulers came, to bolster up our nerve. Thanks so much for writing. It helps a lot. Fondly, Francis Perkins. So we had that kind of interaction with each other. For me, I went off to my career as a college president, a teacher of history, to have ended up having a chance to re-engage her, and through her grandson, her lovely home, which we're trying to secure as a National Historic Landmark. It is that, what we're trying to make it our center, the Francis Perkins Center, has been, as we might say in England, jolly good. So with that, let me present her grandson, Tommy Conjure.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure. I do have some prepared remarks, but I almost feel like they're going to be too long for the time. Should we just maybe just say that I know my grandmother would be very pleased that we are all gathered here together at this conference to recognize and seek guidance from the women involved in the New Deal. She played a seminal role in many of the New Deal programs, most notably Social Security, as Chris said. That was her kind of prime achievement in her mind. But she was never one to care much about who got the credit. She just wanted to see things get done. When FDR invited Frances Perkins to come to Washington to become the first woman to serve in the presidential cabinet, she didn't necessarily want to take that on. Most importantly, it would mean leaving my mother, Susanna, and my grandfather, Paul, alone in New York to fend for themselves. She cared deeply about both of them, yet I think she heard her grandmother's voice in her head saying, "My dear, if a door is open for you, you must go through and do your best on the other side." We learned from Kirsten Downey's book that my grandmother was very distraught that night. She cried as she fell asleep, knowing that her life would forever be changed if she accepted FDR's invitation. Nonetheless, she decided she would have to accept it, but only if FDR would agree to a laundry list of programs she had envisioned to help pull the nation out of the Depression. She planned to present the list as an ultimatum when she met FDR at his townhouse on 65th Street in New York to talk about her appointment. I'm sure she hoped he would say it was a bridge too far and she could then decline his invitation in triumph. But on that day, on the day that they met, after reading the list, after reading the list, she told him, "Franklin, you don't want me for your Secretary of Labor if you don't want to work on these things." And to which I think he replied something like, "Bully for you, Francis, I won't try to stop you." Sort of a tacit approval. Recalling that moment later in life, she said, "The door might not be opened again to a woman for a long, long time." This is in a more serious tone. And I had a kind of duty to other women to walk in and sit down on the chair that was offered, and so establish the right of others, long hence and far distant in geography, to sit in the high seats. My grandmother tried to resign a few times during her tenure as Secretary of Labor, but FDR wouldn't let her. He couldn't do without her. Upon FDR's death, when she finally did resign, Frances Perkins was and still is the longest serving Secretary of Labor and one of the just two cabinet members to serve for the entirety of FDR's presidency, along with Harold Ickes. I was only 11 when she died in 1965, but I remember a loving, humorous, and wise grandmother. My most vivid memory of her has to be about going to church. In New York City, it was to the Church of the Resurrection on 74th Street, just east of Park Avenue. After the service, if I hadn't fidgeted too badly in the pew, we would go for a milkshake at a nearby soda fountain. When we were in Maine, it was to St. Andrew's Church in Newcastle, a place where I still go to church, and I can still sense her presence. But it wasn't until the Episcopal Church named my grandmother a holy woman or saint in 2009 that I began to realize it was from her faith that she drew much of her strength and conviction. A prayer written for her feast day, May 13th, on the church calendar, states her belief that the special vocation of the laity is to conduct the secular affairs of society so that all may be maintained in health and decency. My grandma was a source of strength, courage, and wisdom for me. She still is. But I didn't hear much about her professional life directly from her. She must have thought I was too young to be burdened with the stories of her career and such. But when the new labor building on the Mall in Washington was named the Frances Perkins Building on what would have been her 100th birthday, April 10th, 1980, and Hail to the Chief was being played as Jimmy Carter arrived to give a dedication speech, I realized how important she really was. It is wonderful to be here together as we celebrate the amazing work and enlightening insights into today's economic and political truths that Robert Reich shares with us. His clear understanding of what's wrong with our current state of affairs what would improve our political and economic worlds, and how we get there is like a beacon for all of us who believe in the potential to regain and exceed the heights of social justice, economic progress and security, and human decency that FDR, my grandmother, and so many others worked for in the New Deal era. Robert Reich and Francis Perkins were another great team. While they lived in very different times, they shared the same concern for their fellow Americans. I was delighted to learn that Robert Reich had brought my grandmother onto his team in a way by hanging her official portrait in his office in the Department of Labor's Francis Perkins building during his time as Secretary of Labor. A few years after my mother died in 2003, I began to wonder if there could be a critical mass of interest in Francis Perkins to support an organization dedicated to her legacy. At that point, I decided to contact Robert Reich, since I knew he thought very highly of Francis Perkins. I wrote an email asking for his thoughts to the address posted on his webpage at the Goldman School of UC Berkeley. I was surprised and am thankful to this day how quickly he responded, considering all that he does. He said that it was a good idea and he could write a letter to all other living secretaries of labor asking for their support. As you can imagine, I was profoundly encouraged and very grateful. I thanked him, but I had to tell him it was a little too early for such a powerful letter as we were still at the very early stages. But when I asked if he would be kind enough to lend his name to the organization by becoming a member of the newly formed advisory council, the answer was an immediate yes. So Robert Reich we've been proud to have him on our letterhead ever since the beginning. Armed with Robert Reich's positive reaction and official presence on the advisory board, I began to talk about the idea with friends, neighbors, and family. Much to my surprise, and thanks only to the dedication and generosity of the founding board members, and now to a very committed board, staff, and wonderful supporters, the Francis Perkins Center has become, in a relatively short time, a viable and effective nonprofit with a strong mission to serve the public good by preserving my grandmother's legacy, continuing her work for greater social justice and economic security, and inspiring others to follow in her footsteps. Perhaps we are now at a point where it would be a good time to write that letter to former Secretaries of Labor. I'm absolutely thrilled that Secretary Reich is being honored by the Francis Perkins Center tonight. There could be no one more deserving or more fitting for the Intelligence and Courage Award. He has lots of both.
Yay!